geographical, and racial dimensions. The framework paper, therefore, points towards the 7 pillars of South Africa's response to this pandemic, which should continue to guide us as a united nation as we fight this war. These pillars are public health responses, public health prevention, preparing health facilities for treatment, getting necessary equipment for treatment, ensure other diseases are not neglected, and build the national health insurance capacity. Social relief, deal with hunger, food parcels, vouchers, expand social grants, access to water, access to mental health care, and solidarity. Assist small to medium enterprises, workers and informal sector, expand unemployment insurance fund, relief, and provide relief for the informal sector. Stimulate supply and demand, bridging funding and rescue of businesses, both big and especially small business enterprises. Economic reconstruction, industry master plans must be drawn up, must become a reality. Domestic investment, macroeconomic policy alignment as per the ANC's 2019 manifesto, as well as new opportunities. Build state strategic capacity and contract between the state and the people. Social mobilization to build community resilience and solidarity, and the African agenda and other global issues. Make sure that we begin to strengthen our relationship with our continent. It will never be business as usual. We do not want to see the same economy that we have had before COVID-19 exist after this pandemic is long gone. Working with the government and other social partners, the Alliance has committed to forming part of all these pillars to ensure effective reach and implementation of all of the above. It recognizes that this calls for maximum unity. This is not the time for factionalism, for corruption, or for racketeering. It is a time to unite, to fight this war, to rebuild our country, advance development, and an inclusive growth path. It is time for South Africa to continue to unite and broaden its national unity. The framework paper finally calls for the urgent development of a COVID-19 reconstruction, development, and inclusive growth plan that can form the basis of a social compact for us as we come out of the lockdown. The paper points out to some of the elements of such a plan, including speeding up the implementation of the NHI, that we bring back and investigate the feasibility of a minimum income support grant, focus on domestic resource mobilization through, amongst others, impact investments, or in other words called prescribed assets, the financial sector transformation, and expedite plans for industrialization and, very importantly, localization, including in sectors such as pharmaceuticals, the green economy, agriculture and agro-processing, beneficiation, and the creative and other sectors. The alliance formations such as the ANC Economic Transformation Committee, the SACP Politburo, and Cosatu are working on their individual contributions to the COVID-19 reconstruction, development, and inclusive growth plans. The alliance will consolidate the outcomes and give content to the new economy and broader social transformations required going forward. The large-scale opening up under COVID-19 lockdown alert level 3 places challenges as well as opportunities to us to make up lost ground, to get economic and other activities back on track, albeit in a cautious manner. At the same time, it has great potential to increase the spread of the infections, especially as we now approach the flu season, as schools and businesses start opening, as more people start using public transport. The fundamental right to life remains sacrosanct. We must therefore, as President Cyril Ramaphosa reminded us, ensure that we will act responsibly as government, as parents, as business, as workers, as public servants and representatives, and as communities and citizens of our nature. It is in our hands. We will discuss and act on these matters at all levels of the Alliance and look forward to public engagement and engagement with civil society on this framework paper. In addition to launching the paper, we are also launching an Alliance anti-racism campaign. At a time when global humanity is engaged in this war against coronavirus, we saw the heinous murder of George Floyd by those who are tasked to serve and protect. This sparked protests across the USA by the African American and other progressive communities against this latest expression of institutional racism, which started with the extermination of the Native Americans, the transatlantic trade and slavery. Across the world, progressive humanity has responded to this and are pledging solidarity in different ways against racism. These protests and acts of solidarity not only points fingers to the USA for its continued institutionalized racism, echoing the call that Black Lives Matter, but also provides opportunities for tackling racism wherever it rears its ugly head. From India, Brazil, China, to the USA, in Britain and Europe, the Middle East and Palestine. South Africa is standing to be counted. The USA and its African American community in particular had played a critical role against our own struggle against the institutionalized racism of apartheid. We must, as a nation, add our voice in solidarity to their call that Black Lives Matter. The Alliance, starting tomorrow, Friday the 5th of June 2020, at 1900 hours, through an event to be addressed by the ANC President and other Alliance leaders, will launch its campaign of solidarity with the people of the USA. It will start our own Black Friday, where henceforth we are called upon to wear black on Friday for the next 3 weeks. The Alliance anti-racism campaign to be launched tomorrow will also highlight the racism in our own country and against security force brutality. The deaths by citizens at the hands of security forces are of deep concern to the Alliance. Security forces set out in our Constitution must secure the safety of communities and act against crime. They must be tough, but act in the spirit of the Constitution. The Alliance also notes that the demon of racism remains a blight on the soul of our nation. It reflects itself in institutionalized racism, in apartheid geography, in the economy and social spheres. It also finds expression in the kind of blatant racism and misogyny in social media that we've seen against Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Comrade Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. As a society, this must not be tolerated. And we will and must use the institutions set up to bring the perpetrators to book. On the 26th of this month, we celebrate 65 years since the adoption of the Freedom Charter, who so eloquently told us that South Africa belongs to all, black and white, that all lives matter. We also wish to make a small input on South African Airways. The Alliance welcomes progress to ensure that SAA is restructured and to emerge out of the old with a new, viable, and growing national airline. In line with the commitment made in the budget speech in February 2020, government should act unambiguously and support the restructuring and building of this new national airline. The Alliance Secretariat further resolved that everything possible must be done to urgently restore SAA operations in line with the national coronavirus lockdown regulations and the resumption of activity in the domestic aviation industry. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Bule.
Bule Mabe, would you please conduct the press conference? Cornelius, would you please take over? Bulemabe, would you kindly take over?
Thank you, DSG. Let me take over.
Thank you, Alex.
While Bule is sorting out the gremlins. Ladies and gentlemen, from the media, the DSG has presented the statement of the Alliance Secretariat launching the framework paper of the Alliance Political Council, as well as the anti-racism campaign. Attending, we have leaders, in addition to the Alliance Secretariat, from the Young Communist League, the ANC Youth League, the ANC Women's League. We will now take this opportunity to take questions, and questions may also be asked in the chat room. But let's take questions. I can see Clement Manyatela is the first. His hand is up. And Samkela Tabani is the second one. I have those two hands in the meantime. And let's welcome Clement.
All right, thank you very much, Alex. SG, DSG, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've got some questions. The first one is on the social security. So when you were speaking about this framework document, you talk about social security and the social grants. What I want to
my apologies, Clement. My apologies. I will ask all the comrades and participants who are not on the floor to mute their microphones so that we can have one speaker at a time. Please continue, Clement. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you, Alex. I wanted to ask, there have been calls for government to continue with the 350 unemployment grant, even post-COVID. What's the Alliance's view on that? Is that something that they support, especially given how we'll see high numbers of unemployment post this pandemic? My second question is on what the DSG said, that we don't want to see the same economy before COVID-19 to exist after COVID-19. What kind of economy do you want to see post-COVID-19 that would be different from the one that existed before COVID-19? Thank you.
Samkela?
Oh, thank you. Samkela here from the SABC. My question, one of them has been asked by Clement Manyatela, but more specifically on the issue of the economy. DSG, are you not speaking in the same words of the under fire or the rebuked or reprimanded Mayor of Ekurhuleni and Regional Chairperson Mzwandile Masina when he spoke about that COVID-19, post-COVID-19, the economic landscape should be changed? How would the ANC like to see the economic landscape changed in this instance, because you spoke against the nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy? What are some of the tricks of the economic landscape which you'd like to be seen? And then on the issue of the South African Airways, the Alliance is coming and endorsing the proposed restructuring of SAA. Which social equity partner would you like to be seen to be brought on board to work and restructure SAA on an ownership pattern? Because you speak of a new economy emerging post-COVID-19. Would you like to see a Black-owned company emerging as the social equity partner to SAA? And lastly, is this an endorsement of what the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, is doing with these public enterprises and in particular SAA? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I ask the leadership to respond to the questions, let me check if there are any further hands. Those who would like to ask questions may make use of the system In the meantime, let me allow the leadership to answer the questions and hand over to Comrade Bule to facilitate the session going forward. Comrade DSG, Comrade SG, Ace Mahashule, Comrade Solima Paila, Comrade Becky Njalinjali. The questions have been asked. Please give answers.
Yeah, okay, let me start, Comrade Alex. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to members of the media. The first question regarding the support for relief for unemployed people, the Alliance has tabled for consideration by government a broader social grant that should be considered for all the people in the country. I think that nitty-gritties should be worked out in that. That should cover the unemployed people. So in principle, yes, we think that matter should be considered much more strongly given the difficult challenges we have of poverty in the country. Regarding the issue, the secondary issue, which was also supported by Samkele, although Samkele laced it much more differently with a different connotation to the first question about what kind of an economy post-COVID. We're dealing with the current, and of course, we know that COVID will not be permanent. What is clear is that worldwide, the system of capitalism has failed to respond to the needs of the majority of the people. We are seeing governments intervening in different countries with stimulus packages, including what we have begun to do in our own. And I think that intervention of public money could not be public indebtedness at the expense of private capital. It should be public indebtedness for the public, meaning that we are now seeing possibly a much more stronger role of the public economy. And that should also answer the subsequent question regarding the ownership of South African Airways. Primarily, we want state institutions and public institutions to invest in SAA, to own SAA, but of course to embed this on a stronger aviation industry policy for the country, because aviation remains the best form of transport now and in the future. So that's something that we must continue to look into. Otherwise, the world will continue to trade, will reconnect, and that will require a much more stronger aviation sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Comrade Ace.
My signal is bad. Maybe you can give Comrade Becky there.
Comrade Becky. Comrade Chris Matako.
No, others can ask. I think the question has been responded.
Comrade Becky, you muted yourself while you were still on the floor. Please unmute and continue.
May I come in then? Comrade Becky says he's asking others to answer.
Okay. Thank
and
you,
then I
DSG.
think Comrade Chris will also answer. Firstly, I think we must be very clear that when we look at what has happened because of COVID-19, clearly the questions of unemployment, inequality, and poverty must tell us that we cannot go along in the same way that we've done before. And I'm very sorry that Samkelo has chosen to make this a personal matter. But the difference would be that the policies of the ANC instruct us through the Freedom Charter that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And when we talk about restructuring our economy, we are talking about including everyone in that restructuring process. Naturally, what we would like to see is that Black South Africans are the ones who are in charge of the economy itself. It is not like that now. The structure of our economy dictates that the same people who were there before 1990 are in fact the same people who have control and are in charge of the economy, and we do not have an inclusive economy. So the difference between what we're saying here and what was said by somebody individually is that we include everybody. We do not create a race-based economy only, but we do say we must deracialize our economy. And I hope that is clear enough, Chair.
Thanks, DSG. We have a question from Tsidima Dia. Okay, this is Claudia Milovic. She has two questions. I will read them aloud. The first is what the Alliance sees the role of the private sector should be in the post-COVID-19 economy. The second is whether the Alliance will meet the ANC's deployees, specifically Ministers Pravin Gordhan and Tito Mboweni, on funding for SAA, given that the Department of Public Enterprises earlier this year said government could not give SAA more money. How should the restructuring be funded? That is the question from Claudia Milovic. We have another question from Sibahle. The question is directed to the ANC. There has been widespread criticism that our political leaders, especially from government, have chosen not to condemn the death of Collins Khosa, but are more vocal about George Floyd. She's asking for a comment on that criticism. Please, leadership, take over.
Yes, sir.
On the issue of the death of Collins Khosa, I think that the ANC condemns that death as it does any other death by the security forces. Also, let me say that the Minister of Defense, when she spoke in a press conference, did condemn the death of Collins Khosa on behalf of the government. I do think that it is correct that we should condemn all deaths that are perpetrated by any security force anywhere in the world, including in our own country.
Yes, do we still have more questions?
Yeah, Pula, raise my hand. Hi, everyone. Sorry.
Hi, TD, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. Sidi Madia from News 24. Just two very quick ones. To the ANC and the Secretariat at large, there's been lots of talk about corruption. I think you also made comments now in the time of COVID. GSG, you and I once spoke about councillors. Did that come up? Will there be action being taken? Are the alliance partners asking the ANC to look into what its members are doing and asking for action to be taken? And just for Cosatu, What are the conversations around things like schools? You know, there are many concerns with reopening of many sectors. From what I can hear, SACP is still relatively unhappy about the reopening of schools. What was the conversation around that, and what needs to be taken into consideration going forward? Thank you.
Yes, can we get, before we get answers, I think there's some journalists are saying that their questions have not been fully answered.
Okay, let me start, SG. The question by Claudie regarding yes. Funding mechanism for SAA. We have highlighted quite consistently that firstly, we need a restructured airline. That part we all agree, including the fact that all aviation industry across the world are facing serious challenges given the impact of COVID-19 and lack of travel because of lockdowns of different countries and so forth. And the fact that even prior that, SAA had already gone into voluntary business rescue process. And we've engaged with that process as the alliance for quite some time. As you know, the Minister of Finance had budgeted in his budget earlier on, it announced the program to support South African Airways. But COVID-19 complicated the process of intervention, and there's been tossing and turning around. Obviously, our call now is that government must intervene and support the restructuring of SAA, including of funding SAA. Government has given guarantees at the moment regarding the stimulus package in interventions of over 200 billion to private businesses that are making maximum of 300 million rands to guarantee those through commercial banks. We do not see any reason why a similar guarantee could be given to our national airline in the space so that it's able to come a much more better structured. And that's why we are welcoming these interventions now regarding governments coming on board to restructure the airline, committed to doing that. So that process is fully supported by us. We believe government must make appropriate finances to make sure that the airline doesn't completely collapse. I think it's also important that we are also calling for interventions, particularly regarding the matter that is raised about racism and the killings of individuals by security forces. We condemn that in the strongest terms possible. But regarding George Floyd's matter and the campaign that we are launching, we can remind South Africans that South Africa received massive solidarity internationally regarding the fight against institutionalized racism of apartheid, perhaps more than any other country in the world. And it is very important that we take our moral high ground at South Africa to continue the struggle against racism, including here at home, but also to lead the international community regarding this fight against racism. We have seen the world coming together to reject racism across the board in all parts of the continent. And that is what South Africa should actually embrace itself in, because we remain a moral force in that regard, and we should continue that struggle. And that's why the Alliance Secretariat is now launching this program from tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Do we still have any more questions?
Yes, Comrade Pule, I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, Zingisa Mvuvu here from Sunday Times. My question is on the Black Friday campaign. What is it exactly, practically, that the Alliance wants to achieve through this? I mean, encouraging people to wear black every Friday. I doubt much that it would achieve anything in terms of nipping in the bud the scourge of racism. You know, for instance, we all know that racism is an issue of power dynamics, especially economic power dynamics, but I haven't heard that particular analysis as to what gives rise to racism. Instead, we only hear about this Black Friday. So it's essentially, in short, my question is, what is it that practically this Black Friday will achieve? Thank you very much.
DSG?
Pule, I would like Comrade Chris to answer that question, and I'm just pointing to you that if you open the chat and look at the emails, you will see a number of questions on the side. Thank you.
Okay, we have got another question that this one is from Cosatu. Says a grade 10 teacher in Kyalami has threatened her students of facing the same ordeal that happened to Floyd in the US should they fail to submit their assignments on time. She said in no uncertain terms that she was going to put her knee on their necks. She has issued an apology, but how does the Alliance view this given the campaign that you are now launching? There's another one that came on the role of the private sector post-COVID-19. The ANC position is that an inclusive economy is a mixed economy with public, private, community sectors that play complementary roles. I think this was more an answer to one of the questions that were asked. There's another one, is the ANC willing to call on African heads of state to individually make public statements condemning and ending all violence against Black people on the African continent and in the diaspora? Ending violence against Black bodies must start in Africa first. This is from Tsidi Madia. So I'm gonna leave it to the leadership of the Alliance to answer the questions that have been asked. Comrade SG, yes.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, just to bring the point to the other people that South Africa, for example, is the chair of the AU. And having the president of the African Congress launching the campaign tomorrow, we are actually escalating the campaign to a higher level, which will also go in presentations and representations that will be made at the African Union. So we see this as also connecting with the role that the African Union should be playing and connecting it with our historic anti-apartheid movement that has spread the entire world. Currently, there are people marching all over the capital cities of the world and etc. And as Comrade Soli was saying, we have the moral authority. Those of us who have lived through institutionalized racism, we have a responsibility to bring to bear the consequences of institutionalized racism. Part of that has to be getting the people to understand consciously what this does, and that it actually subtracts from us building a nation that coheres and building a nation that is underpinned by important pillars of the Freedom Charter and many other things that should see us through, both as a South African nation, as a region on the African continent, and as peoples of the world that love peace and coexistence. Thank you.
Yes, SG.
Yeah, maybe I can come in and say, remember what the ANC and its alliance partners are doing today. It's our long-held positions, and we are launching this campaign during the month of June, which is the Freedom Charter Month, where we respect human dignity, where we believe in equality and solidarity. And we are indeed an internationalist organization. And we believe that throughout the world, we are anti-racism. And that's why the position of AU is very clear also. And we are fortunate that South Africa is chairing AU today. And so these positions are not positions we are pronouncing today. We have been holding these firm views and we are reiterating them. And that's why we are saying things must change. The economy must change. People must participate in the economy of South Africa. And exactly this is what we are actually going to do. And our deployees, our government ministers are part of the organizations. They are not there as individuals, and they have been participating, we have been engaging, and we have actually engaged even unions. And that's how we are actually resolving problems as South Africans. And that's why we are making a call to the entire society also to unite, so that as we move forward as South Africa, everybody is on board and everybody participate in the mainstream economy.
Can I also say something, Comrade Pule?
Yes. No bad.
I just want to answer two questions. The first one is whether wearing black on a Friday will have an impact to the issues that we are raising. We believe so. Firstly, it raised a consciousness of one to associate with that struggles. You're waking up on Friday and decided what to wear will be a conscious decision to take. And in this case, to stand with the victims of racism. So it first talked to one's as an individual, whether you want to be neutral in the struggle against racism. It's not an easy decision that when you wake up on a Friday, you decided that you are going to wear a color black. It's a conscious decision that one takes. We have taken, and we have many Fridays here in South Africa. There was a Friday on the World Cup, on rugby. There was a Friday on the soccer. It's a conscious decision that one takes in dealing with the struggle at that time. Secondly, it shows solidarity with the victims, that they are not alone, and together we stand with them. Thirdly, it sent a message to the perpetrators that what they are doing, they need to revisit and introspect their consciousness, that there are many people outside there who say their action are not warranted in the manner they do. The second one is a question that raised about the school and readiness, and what is the view. First and foremost, a school is a workplace. There are workers who work there like any other institution that is engaged in the production, and in this case, production of knowledge. There are people who are working there. There are people whose life, if the situation is not catered for, can be put at risk. It is a responsibility of everybody else, the responsibility of parents, the responsibility of teachers as workers, the responsibility of government who organize that people must come to a workplace to learn. So we're taking the tune from those frontline workers. In this case, the teachers are the first on the line of call, to be advised by them whether in their views the school is safe, that children can come there, learn without being infected with this invisible enemy. So we're taking their advice. We are hearing that some in schools will be ready. We're hearing some schools were ready 2 days ago, but the equipment has been stolen overnight, meaning that school will not be ready by tomorrow if everything has to be considered. But we're watching the space. We hope everybody, for the future of the generation, because our kids are the future of the generation, that we should not, or should do everything possible not to expose them to these dangers. They need to be protected by all of us. Thank you very much.
Can I please check with journalists if we still have any more questions?
Can I come in again, Leadership Bule?
Yes.
Yes. Now, my question is on the lockdown. In terms of the opinion of the alliance, do they support the view that says that the reaction by South Africa was exaggerated in that they had lockdown, as it were? Others believe that it was completely unnecessary. And at this point, by all means, when one drives around, it does look that lockdown only exists in name. What is the view on of the alliance in terms of ending the lockdown entirely, seeing that now on the streets it's as good as normal, and also in line with what I said earlier about an exaggerated reaction based on exaggerated predictions at the beginning of the pandemic? Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes.
I'm Samkelo again, just to get more further clarity on this issue of SAA, particularly around some of the private equity partners. Has anybody come forth to the knowledge of the alliance to government to say that they are willing to partner with government in this new national airline? And what would the ownership structure of this new airline look like, particularly looking that the alliance has a standing resolution that SOCs must still be kept under the government's hands and not be given to the private sector? Thank you.
Okay. Can we have more hands? I think at some point we'll have to wrap up. If we don't have any more questions coming from the media, I will hand over to the leadership to answer the two questions that we've been asked. It's more follow-ups.
Comrade Pule.
Yes.
Yeah, just on and very briefly, just on the SAA matter, I think what Samkelo needs to appreciate is that the alliance discussions that happen at a national level are about the principles that are put in place. They're not necessarily about micromanaging the units and or entities of any SOE. So those are going to be dealt with by the appropriate people, including the department and others that are going to deal with it. What we were putting across are the broad frameworks that should support that process so that we emerge with a sustainable, efficient, and efficacy-based entity that would support the developmental agenda and program of the alliance. And that is our position. And I think we will not be drawn into, who's going to be the equity partner and all of those things. Those would have to be handled by the appropriate people dealing with it. Thank you very much.
I can
Thanks. Yes. No problem.
I think Comrade Chris has responded to that question, and I accept that we still said that it will be necessary for government or the state to still be a major shareholder. Thank you.
Okay.
Pule, there's one last question from us, Sophia. Sorry, Anga.
Yeah, and
also my question was not responded to about lockdown.
Yes.
No. There was a question from the Sun. There was a question from the Sunday Times that had to do with the lockdown.
Please.
Can we just get a response there?
Can I respond to that? That's okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, may I? Okay.
Yes, you may.
Just a response about the question about the hard and soft lockdown. The point that we're making in the framework document and in our media statement that there's no blueprint for any country. For example, Vietnam, the moment they heard about the cases in China very early, had a very hard lockdown on their borders. So anybody that came in, they tested, they isolated them, and that's why they have very, very few cases and no death at the moment. Other examples in other pandemics, for example, in Ebola in West Africa. What happened immediately when the cases started coming out and the WHO declared a public emergency, countries locked down any flights from those countries. Now, it was very hard on those 3 countries, but it means that it didn't spread to the rest of the continent. It was contained in those areas, and it was mainly in isolated cases in other circumstances. So I think that if we look at I mean, I don't know on what basis you say it was exaggerated, the predictions. It's predictions. Any predictions are speculative based on available science. At the time, on the 5th of March, when we had our first case, that's what science said to us, and on the basis of that, government took the decision to have the hard lockdown. If it wasn't for that, we may have had much more cases, as you can see if you look at across the world. If you look at Brazil, they're now in the 100,000s. 2 months ago, they had very few cases. So when it comes to pandemics, it's better to err on the side of caution. That is the first point. The second point is that, as the president said when he announced that we're moving from a soft lockdown to from level 4 to level 3, is that part of the points about your first 2 levels is that the responsibility is on government to say that you cannot do this. Once you move towards the next level, you're putting individual responsibility and you look at how do you introduce other measures. But we're not out of the water yet. Globally, most of the deaths, 380,000 odd deaths that have occurred, happened during April and May in the flu season in the Northern Hemisphere, just after the end of winter during their flu season. We're still going into our flu season, so we're not sure. So we're not out of the woods yet, and therefore we need to keep that public health measures in place, the testing, the screening. We have to do it in businesses, we have to do it in communities, we have to do it at workplaces, we have to do it at schools. But also secondly, we have to wear masks, we have to keep the social distance, the hygienic measures. All of those things are still important, and we need to have, as a media, the public health messages around these issues. The final point is that if one look at the trajectory in other countries, it's a 2-step back, often 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So countries have had their schools open, and then when they hit an increase in infections amongst teachers, for example, because children is much less susceptible, then they had to close the schools again. And I think that is part of what we will have to do as a country. We must maintain our alertness. We need to address those public health measures that I've just spoke about, but we also need to be able to get the public health messages out about what to do as we then move towards lower level. And government have announced these are the hotspots. Of course, what happens in Johannesburg or eThekwini or Cape Town, where you have much more cases, rising deaths, is different from an area where you have 5 infections. So we will have to maintain our alertness as we open up the economy and as we move towards that. The fact that we're now in level 3 doesn't mean that we shouldn't go back. If, for example, we rise to the levels that other countries that have had a second spike have done, of course, that is must be kept as a possibility, because at the end of the day, it is to be able to save lives. Thank you.
I can add.
Yes, can I?
Can I add?
No, wait, Samkelo. Just allow us to give the leadership space as well to sufficiently respond to questions that are being asked. SG?
Yeah, apologies. No, I think what Comrade Phoebe was emphasizing is that let's commend government for the good work they have done. I think our president, the president of South Africa, Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, the Minister Nkosazana, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Dr. Mkhize, and the entire cabinet collective have done well in saving the lives of many South Africans. And I think we need to commend them for the good work done. But we must also commend the media, because the media, government, business, and the entire South African society has been adhering to the regulations. And that's why government indicated earlier on that we are a listening government. But remember, we are not politicizing all these things. Government has acted in the right, responsible way, because we are not like any other part which is going to make and claim this and that. Government has to act responsibly. And that's why we're making a call to all South Africans, because the lockdown was necessary, it is still necessary. It is not true that millions of South Africans are still not respecting the lockdown. There are millions who are still home, who are still under lockdown. There are millions who know that this disease is a killer disease. And we want to emphasize that as South Africans, the media, everybody, let's work and work together.
No, thanks. Samkelo, there was a question that you said Sis Sophie wanted to ask.
She's on the
Yes, my question is directed to the three alliance component. I'm talking about the ANC, the Labour Federation, Cosatu, and also the South African Communist Party. It is South Africa that hosted the conference against racism and all forms of intolerance some years ago. And the then president of the Republic of South Africa in Durban, President Mbeki, couldn't even go home on time to prepare for the funeral of Umgov, because there was a tussle between Palestine and Israel on the final text of the UN conference. It was a UN conference. Now, my question is, looking at what is happening now, do you think South Africa has been able to provide leadership on this issue of racism and all forms of intolerance, particularly at a time where we are in the Security Council, where we have a bit of power to influence member states in the Security Council, particularly the Permanent Five, but also at a time where we are chairing the African Union? Looking at what's happening, is it not too little too late for the ruling party in South Africa to issue statements now, and the SACP and Cosatu? And then the second question revolves around the World Health Organization. What is your view in terms of the work of the World Health Organization? We know that there's a push to transform the Security Council, but to look at other agencies, we are not really talking about other agencies within the UN. The current attack leveled at or directed at the Director General, Dr. Tedros. What is the ANC alliance component position on this matter, particularly SACP?
Thanks,
Okay.
Pula. Wait, sorry,
Yes.
Pula, there is Tandega here as well. Sorry to...
Econ editor.
Hi,
No,
Pula.
that's yes. How are you? Yeah, you can go ahead.
I would like to know whether the current fiscal stimulus is sufficient in the eyes of the ANC, and whether it should be topped up at all. It currently sits at 10% of GDP. Should it be more, given that we anticipate that a lot of the fallout economically will become more visible, and that we may have a double-digit contraction?
Okay, I guess that all alliance partners, Cosatu, the party, and the ANC, they can all respond to that. May I invite the leadership to...
Comrade Sule?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
On the World Health Organization, we've certainly agreed with the government that Mr. Tedros is doing a good job. The fact that one country criticizes him does not mean that the rest of the world should. And we believe that up to now, the World Health Organization has done the best it could do under the circumstances and with the available resources that it did have. Obviously, all institutions can be improved, but the WHO has done a good job. I think we are concerned, though, and we do talk consistently about the transformation of the Bretton Woods Organization, and that we have said, and it is implicit in all our documents. So that is quite clear. On the fact that we hosted racism and is it too little too late, I doubt if it is ever too little too late to talk against racism. And we have done so consistently in South Africa. I believe that we also do so at the UN, in Geneva and elsewhere. And I'm sure we can go through those resolutions very carefully. But it is one thing to talk about it. It is also another thing, totally differently, to actually start mobilizing. And tomorrow night, when the president speaks, we will also have as a guest Anand Sharma, who is the deputy leader of the opposition in the Indian parliament, to begin to talk about religious chauvinism that excludes people as well. So we're not just looking at this matter from a narrow base, but racism in South Africa is alive, and it is something that we need to campaign against and begin to internalize in the psyche of our nation. We are struggling with this matter, and we hope that everyone, including our friends in the media, will become a partner in this campaign. Thank you, Pule.
Thanks, DSG. Can we get more answers to the questions?
Comrade Pule, let me take the question on the stimulus.
Yes, Comrade Alex.
Yes. When the president announced the 500 billion rand stimulus, it was at that time largely a relief package. For example, there is this 200 billion rand loan guarantee scheme offered to businesses with a turnover of 300 million rand. And that package that was announced also comprises unemployment insurance fund intervention and so on. And when the announcement was made, there was a clear message that this was just a phase in a process where further assessment will be made and intervention explored. The paper that we are launching today looks at the question of domestic mobilization of funds in order to tap into these funds in a sustainable manner in the interest of the benefits of those funds, as well as in the interest of the national success in emerging from COVID-19, as well as the crisis before the COVID-19 pandemic. There is several proposals made in the document towards coming up with more interventions that are commensurate to the extent of the crisis. Surely what was announced, as well as taking into account the rate cuts, the 3 rate cuts in March, April, and May by the South African Reserve Bank and other monetary policy operations, which were intended at improving liquidity in the economy. As the Reserve Bank governor had said, it's like making policy in the dark. But there is no doubt that more interventions are required, which is why the paper being launched today looks at the question of further mobilization of funds in order to move forward. There are two key conclusions emerging from the paper. Before the first COVID-19 positive case was confirmed in South Africa, we were in a second quarter of a recession. In other words, we were in a technical recession. In the last quarter of 2019, a population of approximately 10.4 million South Africans, active and discouraged work seekers, were unemployed. Poverty was very high, inequality was very high. And as COVID-19 has brought to the fore unequal development, meaning the persisting legacy of apartheid spatial development persisted and even made some of the interventions to fight COVID-19 difficult. When all of those are taken into consideration, plus the impact of COVID-19, it is very clear that we need more interventions, which is why we are launching this paper. And when you look at the conclusion of the paper, we are saying a second round paper will emerge out of the process taking place within the ANC, in its economic transformation subcommittee, in the SACP from the Politburo, and in Cosatu from the Central Executive Committee, geared towards achieving an economic turnaround and driving broader social transformation. Thank you.
Can I?
Thanks, Comrade Alex.
Can I take a last shot, Comrade, before I leave?
Yes, no problem.
I think the first thing that we need to say to the question that has been raised in regarding to racism is that all those who have experienced racism or have been impacted by racism should never get tired because they understand the pain of racism. It has to be fought at all times, and we hope it will be eradicated eventually. In our case, we may say this, that we have reduced the question of racism.
All right, that's the media briefing by the Tripartite Alliance. I'm Kela Maseko and Sophie Mokoena attending that for us. The ANC saying that they're launching a campaign to reiterate economic liberation for all. Racism also a hot topic at this point that's also being spoken about. A number of issues and topics on the agenda that they are then discussing this afternoon. That's just a few of them that we did indeed bring for you. More from the issue of COVID-19 lockdown with regards to the fact that since moving to level 3, it doesn't mean that we are out of the woods, and talk about the fact that we should be congratulating the government in terms of how it's handled the pandemic thus far. That's coming from the Tripartite Alliance briefing. All right, you're watching SABC News. This is SA Today.